This. Really excited to be here in this discussion, and I just say this right away. So I'm here to learn, right? I'm definitely not the blockchain expert. I'm not an insider like all of you in this discussion, but I don't know, read a bit about it and talked with a lot of people about it, but that doesn't make me an expert. So I don't know, I can frame this a little bit, maybe from the discussions that have been going on that I was a part of around blockchain, and then can introduce you a little bit, and then we can just jump in and I totally step back. So on the one hand, there's when I talk to people in the community, and maybe come to the front, whoever steps in, so that we have a circle of love here. There is this great excitement, right? Not just in platform cooperativism, but just, I mean, all across the, I think, development community. There's a huge excitement about the possibilities of blockchain. On the other hand, there have also been some critiques or like hesitations around the question of really shifting trust, right, from institutions and organizations like unions to what seems to be like an opaque algorithm. So that's why I was really excited this summer when I came across Gregory's work and Archain's work to learn about this, that Archain's, the work around Archain.coop and the way they vote on the algorithm, right? Like one worker, one vote on the algorithm, which I never heard about, and I thought, wow, that really changes this discussion around the blockchain, because suddenly this is really not a locked away black box algorithm anymore, but really becomes much more in the spirit of a co-op, right? So that was very interesting to me. Then I was sitting down with Brad, not so far from here, in his office near Union Square, where when I sat down, he said, "Trevor, I hate the sharing economy just like you do," which I was stunned by. But for him, it's a really interesting project and investment in the blockchain area around portable worker identity, right, as a way to counter the market failure of the sharing economy, right? So like a very involved project. I should also say that Yaso should sit here. So we really were very invested on having a very gender balanced blockchain panel, but Yaso hurt her foot, so she couldn't make it. So I don't know. Like I know I'm not. Haven't really sat down with you. So maybe Ashley, you guys want to introduce your work just really briefly yourselves?
Sure. My name is Ashley. I started researching blockchain when I was working at a think tank 3 or 4 years ago, and that work was mostly around Ethereum and smart contracts, and more focused. And it was mostly focused around how do you use smart contracts instead of capital to organize a group of people towards a common cause. And that was also when I was also doing research and joining like the co-op movement. So this has been part of what I've been thinking about for a long time. And right now I'm super interested in sort of seeing how things have evolved since having that first conversation here a few years ago and where things are at.
So I'm Jamie Burke, I'm founder of Outlive Ventures, which was Europe's first dedicated fund to blockchain 4 years ago. And actually the thing that most interested me in blockchain, kind of got me into the space, was really looking at how these new decentralized web technologies could be applied to the sharing economy. So intellectually, that was the thing that made it all click. And so since then, I'm kind of convinced that a cooperative-like governance model layer is the native governance layer for Web3, because of its decentralized nature. and the ability to tokenize and fractionalize value in that system. So the idea that it's more inclusive, more people can participate in it. I mean, it doesn't mean that there isn't a huge concentration of wealth in, for example, Bitcoin. It kind of mirrors any other capital market almost. But nevertheless, I think this is the beginning of the journey, and we can learn a lot from things like Bitcoin and Ethereum in terms of their crypto economic design. We can design them better to function as more sustainable economies, digital economies. And my hope is that that then translates to the wider world and the wider economy.
Yeah. So maybe we can start. I think you started already, but maybe you can introduce your projects or the things that you are working on, like just initially starting off like that, and then we can sort of dive in. And maybe the first section, you can interact with each other before we then open it up. I'm sure there are many people who have a lot of questions about the blockchain. Okay.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you for organizing this and for inviting us down to speak about this, and thanks to everyone here for giving up your Saturday afternoon to come and hear stuff about blockchain. Can you, is that better? Oh, okay. I'm just going to do that.
If you hold it, it's good.
Is it?
Or shout.
You can do it.
How's that? Better? Oh, okay. Woohoo! Then I can drop it later. Okay, so just some quick facts about our chain. So our chain has over 300 members. Is that better? Okay. So our chain has over 300 members. We were just founded in January of this year. And the membership has capitalized the co-op to the tune of about $10 million. And then, in addition to our existing cryptocurrency, which through their activities has made that currency also worth a substantial sum. So the co-op itself is now capitalized to about $20 million. In less than a year, and what we're all about. So the reason I formed our chain as a co-op, and the founders formed it as a co-op, is because it finally sunk into my bones the inextricable relationship between governance and the cryptocurrency technologies. Basically. You can't separate them, and so I became acutely aware that I had to get the governance model at least on the right path, if not right. And co-op seemed like the right thing, and this goes back to my personal history. I'll just share that back when I was a teenager, I was working in a co-op in West Virginia on a monthly basis to help keep our grocery bills down. And then I went to Oberlin College, which has an extremely large cooperative movement. So I was in Harkness Co-op, where we made all our own tofu and all our own granola and everything else. And so I had a lot of experience. And in Seattle, where I live now, I shop at REI and at PCC. And so it made a lot of sense to me that the co-op was directionally correct. I don't think that necessarily one member, one vote is going to be the right model always, all the time. What I think we have to do is we have to get to an understanding of fluidity, agility, and living structure. But I think co-op is on that path. And so I'm going to just leave that out there as kind of tantalizing nuggets. There's a lot more that I could say, but I want to make sure that I hear more about what you're doing.
So I'm the capitalist in the room. I am a venture capitalist. I work for Union Square Ventures here in New York. And I'm somebody who believes in markets, but I also believe that markets fail. And I think that there's a number of interesting failures in the sharing economy that have mostly to do with equity as the way those things have been capitalized. And I think blockchain-based crypto tokens presents an opportunity to capitalize networks in a brand new way. And I really look forward to this conversation with people who've been thinking about this for a while, because I think it's true that the genius of Satoshi's original paper that described the architecture of Bitcoin was it allowed for the possibility for that network to be bootstrapped without external capital by the participants in the network. And then over time, because of the technology, the degree to which the technology became more and more sophisticated and more expensive, it began to migrate to these professional operations, which now dominate the mining operations for Bitcoin. And so the really interesting and exciting discussion that I think we can have today is how do you construct a network that can bootstrap its own capitalization from its members and still not end up in some kind of concentration. And I think crypto tokens and the protocols that underlie those give us the possibility of doing it, but we haven't seen it done yet.
So I'm also a recovering capitalist, and I also believe in markets and pretty much everything you just said. I think to kind of pick up on what you were just saying earlier, when you were referring to your model, that it might not be the right one, but it's on the right path, and I think that's a really important point of focus, because a lot of the focus goes onto the technology, and actually blockchain-like technology, decentralized web technology, really is a socio-economic, political innovation. And what's most exciting about that is that whilst the technology is open source, it enables for mass experimentation. And so it's not just experimentation with technology, it's governance models, structures. So it's highly unlikely that we found the optimal model now, and maybe there is no single model. But I'm really confident, if you think of the brain trust that the blockchain community have, and now kind of tapping into other communities, we've got some of the brightest people in the world focused upon experimenting in this space, and that experiment will be open and visible, and we can all learn from it. And so that's the most exciting thing for me, is that we're going to see this kind of Cambrian explosion of innovation in governance, in building digital economies, and we're going to be able to quantify whether they work or not, or to what extent that they work. So that's what kind of excites me the most.
Thanks. I guess for me, I started thinking about blockchain and started thinking that I like markets also, but I thought that the way that markets were optimizing were leading to deforestation, leading to inequality. And so to me, it seemed that why can't we make markets optimized to deal with those problems? And then I started thinking about, if you were going to do that with a blockchain structure and not allow for too many people or too few people to have control, then you centralize the data with each of the users. And so that led me to getting really interested in the idea of a digital identity, not so much from the perspective of identifying people and giving them access to the current economy, but rather empowering them to create a new type of economy. And what has become pretty apparent to me is that and I maybe didn't even feel this way when I first started on this, is that I'm less interested in doing a technical design of a system without the people that are actually using the system, especially when we're talking about something so complicated like reforming markets or changing markets or new markets. And I've been more interested lately in building a community of people that want to exchange in this way, and developing the tools that makes the most sense for those problems, given what we know about the failures of market design today. And I kind of was much more deep into thinking about new blockchain protocols and cryptographic proofs and things like that earlier on in my career. And now I'm kind of backing away from that and focusing more on what would be a really simple way to connect people around something that blockchain enables you to do. And so for me, it's all about peer-to-peer trade. It's all about removing the middlemen, and it's all about democracy. So I'm actually
more interested in what a simple, like, traditional web technology platform could do to connect a group of people that wanted to barter and trade directly without money being the means of the trade, rather coming up to contracts and agreements between themselves. So that's what I'm doing and learning how to code as I'm building that. And I think what I'm interested in most long term will be the algorithms that start to connect people and start to think about how do we connect people in a way that doesn't continue to lead to inequality and climate change.
Can I ask the group here for their experience, particularly, I guess, Lucius, if you've been running a cooperative, blockchain-based cooperative, the thing that always seems to me to be the hardest thing to architect is, as you say, the governance, right? And so how do you balance an efficient operation with a very open and democratic governance process? I love the Oscar Wilde line that he would have been a socialist, except they have all their meetings in the evenings. And how do you avoid engaging people on a daily basis in the minutia of operating a network? How do you get the network to essentially operate itself but empower the participants in the network to weigh in when it matters?
First of all, I love those questions. And I think they're the kinds of questions that we actually have to keep alive. They're not necessarily questions that we have a one-time-fits-all answer there. Hopefully I can get, eventually by the end of this, I'll figure out where to hold the mic. But one of the things that we've adopted are some principles. So one principle is radical transparency. What enabled us to build the trust within the community was that those stakeholders who really felt passionate and really wanted to work on this on a daily basis, we had to communicate. So once a week, we held our communications out in the open on YouTube. And that's the ArtChain Community Hangout. And every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, a time chosen specifically so that our members all around the globe can at least tune in, and if they can't, well, they catch it on YouTube later. They see all of the stakeholders who are passionate saying, this is what I'm working on, and then they get to compare it to last week, right? So this is what Greg said last week, and this is what he's talking about next week. So we now have over 2 years of videos where people are able to track our trustworthiness, right? And that data point has created the kind of trust that allowed the membership to invest in the way that it did. So that's one thing. The other is the principle of radical inclusion. Everybody's welcome. And we value the difference of opinions. We value when people say, I don't like that. That sucks. Okay, great. Tell me why it sucks. Right? And let's see if we can find a practical approach to making it better, making it improve. So those are some of the things, just 2 tiny principles, and they're not so tiny because they're really hard to do. But let me pass it on and see.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not necessarily the one doing the stuff, but certainly one of the things at Outlier that we do with all of our investments is that we don't invest in ICOs in the secondary market. We work with early stage companies typically that have proprietary IP, that are a real business, that effectively want to open source for a number of reasons, but generally to gain network effect and stuff like that. So it's interesting watching a proprietary business that has revenues and customers and a product and stuff to risk, open source all of that and have to convince existing investors that that's in their financial interest and make that journey, because they're no longer a company, actually, and okay, it might be a foundation and there's various different vehicles you can set up, but it's almost kind of doing away with the concept of the company, the corporation, because these are networks. Increasingly, they're then reliant on developers to opt into building out that network, and it's a very fluid market. And so, if the developers get bored, they just go and work somewhere else. If they fall out of love with the founders because the communication's not right. So it's a really fluid kind of environment. So we work with Imperial College of London.
Yeah, my own one, Margaret.
Right.
Yes.
And we work with their economics department and their computer science department to design these things bottom up. And one of the challenges is you can over-engineer them. You're thinking that you can predict all the possible ways this thing might mutate, but fundamentally you can build in fiscal policy, monetary policy. You can literally program these economies to function in a certain way. And their labour markets, their capital markets, they're all of these things. So it's a really interesting journey, and I think it's impossible to see how each one of these will kind of play out. But I come back to the point I made earlier. It's kind of one big experiment, and I think it's really interesting to hear kind of your approach. Specifically, kind of coming back to a point you made earlier around concentration. I think the reality is that wealth or what have you, value concentrates in markets, full stop. So I don't think we can, I think the objective is, can we better distribute it? But the likelihood is, when you're talking about blockchain, especially as it gets increasingly more complex, that value is going to concentrate in the hands of a technocracy. I mean, that's a technical elite. And one of the things that is really important for me as an investor in terms of, well, what is the web that I want to invest in to help manifest is, we see a Web3 stack, and that will also include AI. So blockchains and AI are perfect bedfellows. I mean, you couldn't have created a better innovation to power and further AI. So these, yeah, well, I mean, if I told you some of the things we're investing in, well, I will. There's an ex-DeepMind team who, like most ex-DeepMind people, come from a gaming background, massively multiplayer gaming environments. And they're creating a protocol that self-organizes and enables what are called autonomous economic agents. Entirely synthetic, or they could be associated to a physical object, and they basically form markets. They trade with one another, and they're referred to as having no meat. Right? There's no people in it. So that's really exciting, but it's also, this is the reality we're moving into, right? And only a few people can understand it. So for me, the important thing is making sure there's a people layer in the Web3 stack. And so that's why I think it's really important, stuff that you guys are doing, that we're thinking about that now, because if we don't do it now, it will be too late. And I'm talking a matter of years, single-digit years, where that reality will come into being.
I know on the governance and participation front, and this is mostly from my experience being in part of real world co-ops, not digital ones, but to get people to participate, you have to keep it small so that their ownership means something, and their ownership then has to mean something. So if the network got so huge that your ownership doesn't mean anything anymore, you're not going to participate as much. And then this is the classic problem of all worker-owned co-ops is how do you get it so it's not just, it's one worker, one vote, but then someone is doing most of the work. Because oftentimes there's founding members, and it becomes unevenly distributed sometimes. And so then something that we're doing in my yoga co-op is all right, we're taking committees, the person that's doing most of the work is then just assigning the work away. And you come up with the governance problems as they arise because people are incentivized to keep the thing moving and rolling. But another part of it is that it's different. It's a whole different entity than a company. And I think instead of just trying to figure out how to make it work how companies work today, I think we have to kind of allow it to be its own thing. And it's a slower moving thing. Decisions do take longer to happen, but when they happen, they're what most of the people want. And that, for me, at least in terms of companies where I've worked in, where there's a huge inequity in not just like the equity of the company, but like in terms of who's working on what and who has power in the company. And I would say that the working environment of that, even if the company was being successful, like the actual happiness level or the actual like enjoyment and the actual like effect of the work was much more limited than something where people felt like the balance of power was more even. So I think it's like, it is kind of about like saying these are the ideals that we want to embrace, and like how do we keep matching the governance problems to continue on that path.
Can I just see, I just want to see from the people in the audience, like how many of you would say that you have like a really good understanding of blockchain, just to see like who we are actually talking to here. So I don't know, that's quite a lot of, that's 2/3, okay, but there's still this other third, so which we shouldn't forget, maybe, right? And also...
You liars.
Say this again?
Tests were really good.
I think that, yeah, right.
The test is that we hand you the mic and we ask you to explain it to everybody else.
All right. Yeah.
Actually, I'd love to just give a go.
Sure. Good.
Yeah. So here's the way I'm currently telling this story to folks who are just getting into this space. At the heart of the blockchain is a family of algorithms that are essentially economically secured distributed consensus protocols. So it's a way by which a group of agents can come to agreement about something without there being a leader, and that agreement protocol is economically secured, right? So if you're, we can get into that later, what that exactly means, but that gives you a rough idea. Now, once...
Take one of my students over here and see if she understood that.
Right, we should do this.
So you know, essentially what you're trying to do is to solve an age-old problem, right? You got a bunch of people, and they need to agree to do on a particular task, or they need to agree that they've all got the same piece of information, right? And what you're looking for, without getting into the technical details of any one specific algorithm, because any of them could be quite complicated, is that there are now a family of these algorithms that are new and fresh. And what's different about them is that they favor availability over consistency, meaning that people can still go, they can still make forward progress before the entire network agrees on what the data is. Now the next piece of the puzzle is, if you just take it as stipulated that there exist these algorithms, right? So there are these algorithms that allow for these players to agree on something, that some piece of information. Then what piece of information might you store? And the Bitcoin blockchain says, well, why don't we store a ledger? So, you know, Natasha has this many Bitcoin, and Adam has that many Bitcoin. That's essentially what is stored. And that's an interesting and useful answer. Ethereum says we could do one better. And instead of storing the state of a ledger, why don't we store the state of a virtual machine? Right? And then we can use the virtual machine to code up a ledger and a bunch of other things besides, called smart contracts, right? So that's the next step. And then you can ask more refined questions like, what kind of virtual machine might you store, right? And so that's where our chain comes in. It says, instead of storing a sequential machine, why don't you store a machine that could do things in parallel or concurrently? So hopefully that gives people a flavor of what blockchains are, and why it's not just about cryptocurrency. It's not just about even smart contracts. There's a lot more that's going on here that's closer to what you're talking about with respect to autonomous agents.
I mean, I'd add something to it, because I think it's easy to dismiss the cryptocurrency piece, especially probably with this audience, as in its current manifestation, it's the worst kind of capitalism, you know. So take that with a pinch of salt. I think, for me, one of the really important innovations that's enabled because of all the things that you just mentioned is this tokenization of value, and that value can then be fractionalized almost to an unlimited degree. So there was a presentation yesterday that I thought was fantastic. I can't recall the guy's name, but I think he's here in the audience. And you know, he was addressing how can cooperatism and in its different forms. I think it's called an EWOC. He had a particular kind of financial construct that enabled cooperatives to tap into credit and use that credit to effectively acquire assets. And he said the missing ingredient for cooperativism to compete is access to credit. So if you think about what's possible with the cryptocurrency markets, we've got our own money printing machines, in effect, which is as innovative as the printing press, if you think about it. So we can print our own sources of money, and we can distribute that. We can lend it to projects that we believe in. And if that value is realized, we can participate proportionate to the risk that we've took. And yes, those it can be that if you've been able to buy into the system more, you're going to make more from it. Again, you kind of just have to accept that. But for me, this is huge because it could lead to the mutualization of everything.
Well, I don't know, like in my conversation with Ethereum and, I don't know, many blockchain proponents, I often found that it was sort of presented really as a belief system. And that there was very little, and I was sort of seen like the doubting Thomas if you ask questions. And what I was looking for is always, like always with technology, right? I say, well, show me what it does now. Like, you know, not like Silicon Valley, which often let's say like, well, you know, just, you know, let's all the flowers bloom and in 20 years the world will be this utopian, you know, techno-empowered paradise. But no, you know, like what does your thing do right now? And for example, what does this crypto token buy a programmer right now? Can we pay a programmer right now?
Yes.
You know, so I think it's a fair question. I don't want to sort of jeopardize the discussion, but I think this is a fair comment.
So,
give me that mic. Give me that mic right now.
the answer to the question, what does it do now, is very little. And I think we have to acknowledge that. I mean, basically what it does now is secure a distributed ledger to allow for a store of value. And the vast majority of what's being done is storing Bitcoin. And if you just across the globe, that's where most of the value is, that's where most of the activity is. And by the way, it's not that much activity because people are using it just to store value. And so they're not using it very much to transact. So that is what's being done today. And it is also fair to say it is a belief system in the same way that the internet was a belief system. It was a belief in decentralized, emergent, bottom-up innovation. It was a belief in humans and individuals ability to be creative when given the opportunity to be creative. And yes, I think most of the people involved in it believe in those principles and believe in those values and believe that this mechanism will allow for the re-decentralization of the web, which is, you know, and yes, there are lots of, you know, legitimate critiques. I think, you know, one of the harshest critiques is that it is a Ponzi scheme. And when you talk about Bitcoin, you can make the argument that yes, the very early participants in the network that encouraged other people to participate in the network, just like in any Ponzi scheme, did better than the ones that came in later. But what you can't do is say that the ones that came in later aren't going to do great. We don't know the answer to that yet. You can say that with a Ponzi scheme. You know that at the end, when the music stops, there is no money, but it does appear these networks actually create value and the people coming in later continue to participate in that value. So anyway, we could talk about the underlying technology. We can talk about why it's called a blockchain. We can talk about, you know, how it works. But I think the much more interesting conversation is why is it important? Why does it make sense today? And I'm going to bring it back to the AI question. Right now, we are living in a world of very rapid consolidation at the applications layer on the web. Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon are beginning to dominate the entire experience, and there's a reason for that. They have more data than anybody else, and because they have more data, they can create better user experiences than anybody else. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or an accelerating circle. And it's a really scary prospect. Trevor said at the beginning, you know, that he's nervous about these algorithms being unaudited and unaccessible. Well, actually, that's not true. Blockchains are open public data stores distributed across many, many servers, which are identical on all of those servers, and anybody can latch onto that network, add a server to that network, download the entire chain and the entire history, and have all of that history available. And then the protocols that run on that blockchain are completely open source. In other words, anybody can see them. And oh, by the way, anybody can take that original chain and the protocol, and they can fork it, and they can take it in a different direction. And if the community follows them, it evolves independently of the original chain. So they are radically open. The reason that's so important is that we move into Skynet and the world of artificial intelligence. We have two choices. Either we're going to see the development of artificial intelligence within the very proprietary data stores of Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, or we're going to see it in these open public data stores. And Ashley's actually got her finger on something really important, which is that ultimately the right answer is that each of us as individuals maintains an open public data store that allows us to invite algorithms from different providers to operate against that data store, and gives us the authority to decide whether or not we like the output of that algorithm. And if we're not doing that, we're going to live in a very scary world where we are already seeing the implications of allowing a completely proprietary data store and a completely proprietary set of algorithms to construct a news feed to create our perception of the world. And if we don't open that up, we are not going to be autonomous actors working against information that is, that we're choosing, and algorithms that we're choosing. So that's my little.
If I can distill that, because I think it's I think it's wonderful. There's so many. I'm trying to remember all the things I wanted to say to it, and I think that is the existential threat that everybody should be thinking about. And so what does this stuff do today? Well, I actually think, functionally, you look at it and go, well, you can't really do that much. But what it's done is it's mobilized people and capital around open source. And for me, that is huge. I mean, companies that would have otherwise been proprietary businesses, and by the way, 90% of them fail, which means most of the capital's lost, most of the IP's lost, the teams dissipate. A really inefficient way to innovate, and a really inefficient way to finance innovation. Here, because things are open source generally, and they can be forked, is why, for me, it's not a Ponzi scheme, because the music never has to stop. Right? So one experiment might fail, you can fork it, you can clone it, you can tweak it, and it can evolve. And by the way, when you do that, you can honor the ledger. So you can honor how value's distributed in that ledger or not. And so, this has enabled an infrastructure for us to self-organize for whatever purpose, and ensure that that value is distributed. And I kind of end that slight rant on the concept that we could have AI co-ops. Just saying. So with our own data, we can own, and if people are interested, I can talk about that a bit later. We are investing in companies that effectively are enabling AI co-ops.
For me, two things that have to happen, like going off of if we're either going to go to this world that's dominated by the big data giants or we're not, which I kind of have to believe that we're not, or otherwise, what's the point of doing any of this? So then if we're not, then we have to have the right infrastructure for non-technical people to be participating in the governance, like in the beginning. It can't happen later because then they weren't governing. And I think closing that gap, like I really haven't worked with a lot of people, I mean, including myself, who are even thinking about how to do that or trying to put resources towards that or saying that like that's fundamentally part of the new economy. So I think that is super important even as we're talking now and thinking about that a lot. And then the other thing would be, oh, I'm forgetting it now. I'll pass it. Oh, okay. So the identity part, right? So that's obviously super important that now we're centralizing our data with ourselves. But because that technical gap exists and because there's not a lot of work being done around infrastructure to not close that, how do we ensure that the identity protocol and like the interface and the way that most people access it, that those identity companies don't become the gatekeepers? And I would love to like believe that that wouldn't happen, but I've been in enough conversations with enough people working on stuff like this to see that it totally could happen. And I think that's the question that people need to be thinking about, and then also saying, so what would that identity governance layer be from the beginning before we get into this? I think what we realize with the internet is like these things can't really be afterthoughts. They're not that effective.
Can I just plug something linked to that? Because so we've just invested in a company called Evanim that's open sourced. Their identity solution actually is much more than identity solution to a foundation called Sovereign. And identity is complex, but identity basically means a series of verifiable claims. That's all identity is. And they allow for self-sovereignty and in a decentralized structure. So it already exists. Maybe it's not the one. I think it is. But I think everything starts with that identity layer and self-sovereignty. And from that base, you build everything up. Sorry.
No, I think that's, in terms of what you can do today, that's a wonderful vision. I think you're absolutely right that identity is a very complex issue, and currently Facebook is the de facto provider of online identity for more than 500 million people. So there is an existential threat. I have to bring this back though a little bit down to my 14-year-old son. We just the other day we were standing in line going to Ethereum DevCon, and it was a long line, and so he wanted to pass the time. So of course he's talking to me about games, and he makes this astounding proposal. So the proposal that he makes is that the meta game, the evolution of the game for baseball, basketball, football, is nothing like the meta game for esports. Okay, he's really into gaming. He loves the fact that Smash Brothers Melee is moving many times faster than you see in these older traditional games. And I was astounded by first of all the fact that a 14-year-old boy is making these kinds of observations. And I want to go back to play off of your comment, because what I've heard in this room is designing markets. What I've heard is reclaiming our notion of identity and our notion and re-decentralizing the web. So the meta game here, you talked over, the word you used again and again and again was evolutionary, right? The meta game here is super fast, right? And the reason this is important, so now to bring it very concrete, is because if you look at it, there's not one way to coordinate each other, right? We have finance as one coordination technology. So markets are one clear, obvious coordination technology. Governance is another coordination technology. We've mentioned Facebook several times. Social media has emerged as yet a third form of coordination technology. None of these coordination technologies currently are moving fast enough for us to organize ourselves with respect to the consequences of how we have lived on planet Earth. Climate change is moving much faster than we think it is. And we have to learn to coordinate ourselves very fast. So this exciting new technology is very practically showing up at a time when we need to up our metagame, right? And so that's why it's important not just to say what can we do, what can it do for us now, but what can it do for us in relation to what's really the existential threat of the present moment.
Sure. Well, so I just want to come back to this rhetoric, which is, not in this room, but rhetoric in the discourse around blockchain out there, where there's really this discussion around the failing institutions that don't deliver democracy, and now here is the algorithm that is supposedly shifting that, and so there the transparency of the algorithm really matters, right? And so this is why I was so thrilled by Gregory's intervention to basically say, like, let's as a cooperative, like, vote on this algorithm, which I thought was interesting. So what I would like to do before we take questions is maybe just to hear from each of you, and this emerged a little bit already, how you would, we are at this conference about platform cooperatives, about the cooperative platform economy. So how can we make this link, right? So one thing that Jamie made this link to the credit issue. We heard the governance issue, which is definitely one of the biggest problems, I think, in the cooperative world, is governance. And I think this would be central. But maybe we can hear from each of you a bit on that, like how you make that link. How would you see that link? How can your insight help this community? And then we can open it up.
So this community is thinking about platforms and co-ops, and so I really like the focus on the metagame, and I think that we've talked a lot about governance. We've talked about designing it or allowing it to emerge through market mechanisms on these platforms with a new foundation. I'll make it very concrete to make it a little bit easier. We have a problem with Uber. The problem with Uber is that it's based on an equity model, and the most recent valuation of Uber was about $60–70 billion, and that creates an expectation of earnings in a few years of about $10 billion. That's a lot more than they have today. So Uber, because in order to deliver a return to their equity investors, has to find a way to either expand geographically or expand vertically into multiple industries or increase their take rate. So if you're on that platform, if you're a driver or a passenger on that platform, it means that you can expect that more and more of the value created in that platform is going to go to the equity shareholders over time, and that means it's coming out of your pocket. I think there is an opportunity. If you think about what Uber actually does, it coordinates the activity of a driver and a passenger. They had some brilliant innovations, like using the GPS in the devices, using a map to give you confidence that the car was actually coming to you. All of these things were really wonderful innovations that made a huge difference in reputation systems, made a huge difference in giving you the confidence to use the network. But it hasn't changed much since those original innovations. And so you can imagine that platform could be reduced to a protocol. And if it is reduced to a protocol, then that protocol uses a token to incent the economic behavior, to get a driver to show up, to give passengers the confidence that a driver will show up. Then what you can imagine, that the difference is that instead of a company that is trying to create monopoly profits for the longest period of time and then return those to shareholders, if the token is mediating the behavior on the network, then in the driver's cash register, in the passenger's wallet, as more people come to the network, that token appreciates. So the participants in the network will participate in the value that they're creating in that network. It's a fundamentally different model, and I think it's one that is really not too far off, and we're going to begin to see it more and more on all of these platforms in the near future.
Yeah, that's a great example. I also want to look at the question the other way around. Part of the reason I'm here is to learn from other cooperators, to learn from other people who are have experience living what it means to be a cooperative. I think we don't know a lot about how governance works with the blockchain, and I really want, I stay awake at night thinking about the issues with respect to labor and what happens when decentralization sweeps through the globe and it's the Wild West again. And just as many people can be disenfranchised, but now in a digitally accelerated way. So I really want to hear from folks, you know, how do we design it so that, or don't design it, anti-design it, so that it works differently. So that, I think that's another side of the question.
So I think it's important to think about what you collectively or individually want to try and achieve as a system, right? A competing system. And you're not going to be the only system in town. And there's one kind of system at the moment that we know is not working. But I think it's really important to, I mean, do you want to be a niche or a niche? I don't know what you call it in the States. Niche. That's what it's supposed to be called, by the way. Do you want to just be a niche? Or do you want to create a system that can go mainstream? Because if you want to compete with Uber, you need to create a system and an experience that is, if not equal, better. Because mainstream first care about price, convenience, or interchangeably between the two. And then maybe ethics. A lot less than most of the people in this room, right? So I think if you sit there and kind of overlay your priorities onto the market and assume it's going to behave in a certain way, it's probably not, right? You know, and people still use Uber despite all of the horrible things that they hear because it's convenient, right? And it's usable, and they can go to any city in the world and away they go. So if you want to create a competing system, then I think we need to accept those things and try to take it mainstream. Maybe you don't want it to be mainstream. I don't know, but.
I actually don't use Uber not because it's the convenience, but because I don't like the way that the company is run, and what Brad is talking about is part of the philosophy behind that.
Most people,
yeah.
Most people do use it.
I think most people have a hard time imagining an alternative, which I think is a fair thing, because I don't think that there are, I just think it's a hard thing to do. And for me, that's why, as being someone who was interested in co-ops and then started reading about blockchain and smart contracts, and I saw the parallel there really strongly, because they both are trying to be alternatives. And it wasn't like, for me, the technology itself that got me so excited. It was the fact that it was like a group of people coming together to build something different. And I think we kind of touched on that like blockchains are a new way to try to coordinate a group of people. I feel like that we're in the early stages of even trying to think about what that means. But I think what is important, if you are trying to approach it from the co-op perspective, and I can't speak for everyone in co-ops, I think, though, that there's a vibe of joining a co-op because you don't want to be dependent upon big business that's like invested in things that you don't believe in. So I believe that in order for like co-ops and blockchains to merge, there has to be a sense that the underlying investment of the technology is something that people have a shared belief in, and it can't look like the current economy then. And so I think for what that means for me, or what I continue to try to think about, is how to not map the existing system on top of the new technology. I think that's going to be the hardest thing for success, because what happens is that when projects start to get funded, it becomes easier to think about what's been done, and it gets quicker, and you can move things fastly because all you have to do is say, well, we're putting a blockchain on this. But I think when you take like the longer term like co-op approach, it really is like, how do we allow the principles of both the co-op movement or whatever the movement is to create their own system of currency and exchange. And I think having multiple different systems for different purposes would be a great outcome of what could be developed, but the infrastructure to do that would have to be in place, and I don't see it there yet, but I think we can get there.
Okay, so then let's start with questions. So I think you were first here, right? Yeah, and
so,
then
my name is Anders Jackman, and in fact, there is something that has emerged in Spain, or actually Catalonia. It's called Faircoin. So in Bitcoin, you produce new Bitcoins by expending huge amounts of energy for no good purpose, just solving stupid crypto problems. In the Faircoin system, the way you earn Faircoins is you actually do business with a co-op, and you get paid in Faircoin. So when you deliver something to a co-op, the co-op pays you with Faircoin, okay? So this way, first, we solve the ecological problem of Bitcoin. Second, we solve the big problem of the contemporary monetary system, which is basically just injecting liquidity into the banks that are then investing it often into things that kind of need to be pyramid schemes to get funded, like Uber, but are not actually funding communities that could actually have these internal currencies that would generate velocity of exchange and bring everyone up, all right? So here is a great example of using the blockchain technology as to facilitate the co-ops generate their own currency and trading with other co-ops. Yep. I can tell you more about that, but curious what you think.
should we take 2 or 3? And
Yeah.
So the second question that was handed to me here, and then I think we go back to Ethan and then move on.
I think the guy in the middle has had his hand up for quite a while. So.
This person here was waiting, and then we come to. So this person lost his voice, so I'm supposed to read it out. Can you comment on the evolution of the relationship between cryptocurrencies and fiat currency? The later is needed to sustain life. So
That's,
okay,
we can
And
handle
then
those two at once.
these two, and then maybe should we ask one more question?
Oh yeah, my question, since blockchains and technology generally are fairly morally agnostic, what do you think about the reality of creating blockchains in the context of pretty overwhelming violence and asymmetrical violence in our society? And how do you feel about basically reproducing that violence in a distributed ledger, verifiable way?
Verifiable violence.
Creating systems of human liberation.
Okay. You want to try this a few months together? Yeah, it seems to
Is this one working? For the third question by ducking it, yes, thank you. Well, I'm not going to entirely duck it. I am one of a whole lot of people who was completely enthralled with the early internet and the degree to which, the world before the early internet was dominated by media companies that controlled distribution. Then we all agreed to talk to each other, and all of a sudden those distribution bottlenecks went away, and we could reach anybody, and we had a profound set of consequences that really opened up for an early Cambrian explosion of innovation. But one of the political consequences was the Arab Spring, and I, among others, naively believed that in a world of open communication, dictatorships would not last, and the Arab Spring fueled that hope, and then it was crushed. And what we learned is that technology is morally agnostic, and dictators figured out how to use it more efficiently than we did, and perhaps had more at stake and invested more in understanding how to use it than we did. And so this time round, I really do believe, I do, as I said earlier, believe in decentralized, emergent, bottom-up, startup innovation. And I do believe that open public data stores will reignite that innovation. But I'm a lot less sanguine about the direction of that innovation. I'm a little bit more worried about the problem that you pose, but I don't have an answer for, at least the only difference between this time and the last time is that this time we're going into it trying to encourage the decentralized innovation, but aware of the possibility that it could backfire.
Yeah, and building on that, I think, again, it's about building systems, and I think we need to your point, rapidly accelerate that process, because the danger is, China have already announced their citizen score recently, right? There's no better tool to realize that than a blockchain. Modi is trying to crack down on cash. And there's no better system to use than a blockchain to create a cashless society where every transaction is auditable. So we've gifted these innovations, and I think the great thing is that the cycle between Web 2 and Web 3 is close enough that we collectively have a memory of what the utopic thoughts and ideals we had in Web 2. I guess normally these cycles are far apart that people forget about them. So I think the advantage is that it's short enough that we can recall, shit, we really got hoodwinked on that one. And hopefully now we can point our attention to designing a system that's at least going to compete, because, again, you can't stop other people creating systems that have different intent, but we can rapidly accelerate. And I think, again, it comes back to me, this is why the token part's important, right? Because the reality of today is capital drives attention, right? It drives the creative attention and output of people. Maybe there's a better system, a better solution that's going to come. But on the whole now, put $1 there and people are going to focus on it. And so there's an opportunity to, within the current system, drive attention to this new system we want to create.
But then just re-emphasizing the question here, right, was the relationship between the cryptocurrency and fiat money. And to see basically, will this token put stakes in the freezer of this open source developer?
Yeah, well, so I'll let you expand on it. But basically, fiat is no different to a token, right? It's just got a different issuer. Right, and we choose to believe in this piece of paper as a debt that we can go to a bank and they're going to, exchange. So it's exactly the same. The reality is, which is why I don't think Bitcoin, for example, will ever be used to buy cheeseburgers, because people don't want to have to make conversions. People are lazy, right? They don't want to have to make currency conversion every time they're buying a product. So for me, actually, these are kind of these things should be invisible, and actually we could just create a fiat-pegged cryptocurrency, right, for actual means of exchange that's more stable and.
It's already happening. I want to say that there are differences. There are real substantive differences between fiat and crypto, and one of them again goes back to public works. There's no one in Bitcoin Nation that's going to go extract taxes from you. Just isn't going to happen. But the IRS can knock on your door and has the right to enforce extracting taxes. Now, sometimes
people will try and tax your capital gains in Bitcoin or any crypto.
Yeah, but again, no, that's a separate. You have financial fees on all the fiat currencies as well, and that's for the services providers, right? But taxes fund public works. And so this goes right to this point about morally agnostic, right? It goes straight to the point about morally agnostic. But I want to say that specifically with respect to our chain, of all the things that we're considering, me personally, what I'm working on is last mile first. I'm working on making it easy to use our chain to walk into the farmer's market and get vegetables and tofu and whatever. Right, and make that seamless. I want to make it easy for doctors to come together and with patients who can also come together and pay each other. I've already, I've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid in the sense that I've seen it's possible to create these networks where the value begins to emerge amongst the parties. And so I think that this becomes possible. And so this is my personal practical goal with the R-Chain technology. But I don't yet know how to solve this other problem around making sure that public works get funded. But I do know that I was just at Ethereum DevCon, and someone came up to me and started talking about this project called Gifted, which is very much about public works, blockchain-based public works kinds of things. And I was very intrigued. I haven't had a chance to go look at it, but that's a project to look at.
I think the idea of blockchains being morally agnostic, like I don't think I believe that. I think, and even when I look at like the history of the web, I mean, I wasn't like in my career when the web was being created, but I think that if you were to like look back and think about the moral obligations of the companies that are now the consolidation layer of the web today, I think there is like definitely some tendencies there. It is like consolidation of data. Like that's a very clear example of the kind of world that they were part of shaping and creating. And I think the same thing could totally happen and is happening in blockchain. I think if we don't admit that, then we're kind of being a little bit ignorant. So I feel like the question is more like, how do we not allow that to be the case? How do we like take ownership over the fact that like we are part of building the things that are going to impact a lot of people? And then if we are going to do that, like what's the best way to take in the consideration of the people that is going to be impacted by that?
So Ashley, you said something earlier about the scale of co-ops and the degree to which it's difficult to really grow them beyond a certain point. And one of the characteristics of the internet was that it was a network of networks, and you could have a set of smaller networks, and you could be a member of a smaller network, and you could still interact with a larger network. I've heard now about Faircoin and R-Chain, and it sounds like both of them intend to be, a medium of exchange within a community, it's instead of a government backing that medium of exchange, it's a collective of community members, a collective of co-ops, for instance, who say we'll accept this medium of exchange, we'll accept this currency, and I think I'm not a techno-utopian, but I am a techno-optimist, and I believe that it might be possible to have currencies grow as networks of networks. And the really interesting thing to watch would be the exchange rates between networks and the degree to which that becomes really highly automated, such that I don't have to think too much about it, but I'm able to basically present something and get something done. Maybe it's just a chip in my phone, and I can get something done in different networks, and the exchange is handled behind the scenes. But if that exchange can be really seamless, then I can imagine bootstrapping a network of networks by a lot of these smaller cooperatives accepting these currencies.
Question here?
Hey, so one of the things that would like some clarification on is we've talked a little about the failures of Uber, and some of these just seem like failures of capitalism, and then it seems like blockchain is just more capitalism everywhere, almost like to control all of society and to control everyone. And we can see non-capitalistic ways of group decision-making happening in autonomous regions or in small communities. So where do you see community being, like, without, say, a capitalistic currency to mediate things, where do you see that being a good way of coming together as a group, versus when do you need the currency to run this thing? Or where do you see that trade-off?
I was kind of hoping Ashley would do this
processing.
one.
I don't really. So again, I think technology generally is agnostic. A gun is agnostic, right? So I don't think that inherently, just because it has a means, a token or a cryptocurrency is just a means of exchange, and that token, that unit of value, can represent time, it can represent access, it can represent all of these things. It doesn't have to be a speculative asset, and you can actually design it so you're limiting the ability for people to speculate with that.
Or just one thing, like when you say it can be, you're still assigning a value to something that you could do without some unit that you say, like, this is worth this, and we're going to trade these things. You could have a society that, you don't need that. So
but you need a unit of value to be able to fractionalize. Trying to think of the right word. You need a unit of value. Whether you like it or not, and we are moving into a world of greater decentralization and greater automation, right? And I think we need to align these two things. Otherwise, automation is going to be in the hands of people like Uber and Google and whatever, and you'll have no choice other than to unplug from the internet. So, for me, a unit of value is that unifier, right? It doesn't have to be massively speculative. It can be. I'd argue it helps, but I'm a capitalist, so.
There are so many more questions, though, and I think this person in the back has actually tried for a very long time. And then you second, okay? Yeah?
I just have I've been holding a question that's just on that line. I have to take some issue. I mean, I think there's an inconsistency there in that you can design it to be infinitely speculative or to be less speculative, and that's a design choice, and it's a morally informed design choice. So clearly, there's morals in the technology design choices we're making at every stage. So I'm not sure what a technology stack that has no morally charged design choices in it would look like. And I think the question I have, so I had like a nuts and bolts question, which is so we've built some initial platform co-op offerings, and the blockchain promises of being able to distribute and share resources amongst cooperatives is really promising, and it's amazing. And it's actually the speculation and the volatility in the market that means that right now it's really a hard use case. Especially if there's lots of the promises of reaching banks with blockchain, all of these kind of promises to reach out to the margins. The volatility in the market makes it very hard to actually realize any of those right now because it's so easy. How can you ask someone who's living on dollars to dollars a day to subject their income to such volatility? So I'm kind of curious if the panel has any thoughts about. Brad, I really like the way you framed this initially, the genius of blockchain bootstrapping with so little capital up front. How can we bootstrap the kind of blockchain-enabled co-op movement when the market is so full of what appear to be these kind of libertarian values in the system?
Well, I mean, so again, I think if you're designing a system and you want mainstream to adopt that system, so it becomes the overriding system. To date, we all live and we all directly or indirectly endorse capitalism, by participating in a capitalistic society. So we have to accept that, right? And so personally, I think leveraging some of the tools that capitalism has given us to serve a different purpose but it's just, that's my opinion, it's just one approach.
You've been so patient. I want to hear your question. I do want to respond, but you've been so patient, I would love to hear your question.
I'm a veteran, and I am down here from Washington, D.C., and I work in some of the IBM group up in Canada and Toronto. And the only reason why I came is, they told me to come and check out disruptors. But I got to tell you, I hate technology. I think that you're all a bunch of fools. I'm more in the camp of the creative conversation with Ian, the guy that created mobile, just came out from Fast Company a month ago. This is like trying to fix a flat tire.
What's your
And to tell you the truth, as a veteran, this is veteran. Don't tell me about agnostic. This is bullshit. This is the Gold Star family. I lived in Washington, D.C. with my father, 95, World War II vet. And the horse shit I'm hearing nowadays, and especially from technology, I'm totally pissed at you. When you tell me that capital is the driver, I want to pick up a gun and go to war. I am not in favor of what Wall Street has done with your technology. I feel like I'm riding in a, I've seen the car hit the wall. Now I'm riding in a train doing 1,000 miles off of a precipice, and I'm pissed.
Can you try to channel that into a question for us?
Here's what it is that the data breach that I listened to on Wednesday night in the congressional hearings, I'm telling you, if you're not scared now, you better grab your ass, because it's going to take a human solution. And who I am standing with is the Lakota Indians. These people that can't stand your technology, but they still have their feet on the ground. They're still humans. That's the cooperative I want to belong to. And I'm not going to, you know, I respect every one of you, but I tell you what, either we are going to become human beings with some ethics and how we treat each other and start caring about one another. This technology is not going to solve the problem.
Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, I love the comment. I absolutely agree, and this is why I keep talking about the technology is a part of coordinating capacity. We have to be able to coordinate ourselves, and I largely view this as a suite of tools that allow us to tap into what the Indians have known for a long time, is how to tap into a larger collective intelligence. That collective intelligence is real. And the recognition of that fact goes to the foundations of the democracy of this country, right? We're not a monarchy because we believe in the wisdom of the collective intelligence over any single individual intelligence. And I think largely what we've been talking about here is what are the ways that we can support the formation of that collective intelligence. Co-op is one. There's a hope that the blockchain might also support the formation and access to that collective intelligence. But I wholeheartedly hear you. Absolutely.
I mean, I feel like I need to personally respond to that. So your enemy, if we want to kind of frame it in that context, no, but let's just say that the state or whatever it is that you're...
I don't have no state
okay.
enemy.
Well,
don't make me
there's a system that you don't like, and they have technology, right? They have technology, and they are using it to serve their purpose and not your purpose. So my point is, and maybe you didn't hear this throughout what I was saying, but my point is that we need to use that technology to serve our purpose. Now, you can opt out of it. That's totally your choice. But what I'm saying is that the system that you might not like has that technology. It has a technology advantage, actually. And wars are generally won with technology advantages. So. Another question from somebody?
Well, we didn't answer the question in the back. Can you restate it for us?
I think it's two questions joined. The short-term question is for folks who are working in this space and want to start building, platform co-op tech on the blockchain. How do we address the volatility issue? The second question, more generally, is it a symptom of a larger architectural issue we need to think about? And that's what I've been spoken to a little bit. Do we need to really think about how these systems are architected?
So the question was, right now, all of the tokens that trade in the marketplace are very volatile, and people are uncomfortable using something that volatile as a medium of exchange. And so, and particularly if you're trying to protect the interests of a collective, and particularly if that collective is not technology savvy, but really just trying to get on with their lives and sees this as an enabling tool as opposed to something that controls them, how do you make them comfortable in this environment? And and then you have to come back to the question of, it's particularly difficult if you need to aggregate capital to get started. So if you're trying to do something like a fiber co-op where there's a significant investment, you have to allow for the speculation. You have to, you have to bring speculators into the token in some way. If you're doing something that doesn't have that capital requirement up front, obviously you can have, you can make it less attractive to speculators in some way. You can, there are people that are experimenting with very long lockups that, make it very difficult to get in and out of the tokens. I think there are people that are experimenting with requirements to bond or stake to participate in a network, which dampens volatility. I think the only real answer is we don't have an answer, but we have a whole lot of experiments going on, and hopefully one of the things that yields is, sort of a series of, sort of lurching towards something that becomes more stable, more useful, more trusted.
I gotta jump in. And yeah, I really want to hear from you. But so again, what I tried to say at the very, very beginning is that the blockchain is not about tokens. I mean, you can use it for that, right? And I agree, some very awesome, interesting applications. I don't agree that we have to continue to submit to the idea that value has to be turned into a number. I don't think that that's something that we have to submit to at all, right? And so if you just think about it as some open source technology that could be run over a bunch of global servers, you can start using it right now. And there are a bunch of people who are pounding on it, and so you get a lot of value off of their hard labor, right? So ignore the tokens if that's not cool, if it's too volatile for those people, and just use the other value.
So we heard from a lot of dudes. I don't know if there's some women in
Yeah, can I just answer first the question about the currency and the community? I think, and what's always been more interesting to me is using the blockchain to coordinate not for the currency itself, but for using reputation. And I studied cultural anthropology, and a lot of my training or research was in reading a lot of the classic field of economics texts, but looking at it from the perspective of culture and what cultural anthropologists had said. And one thing has been interesting in different societies is trading based upon IOUs. So you would enter into direct relationships with other people, where you would, lend them something for a day, let them use your plow, or you would go do something for them, and then you didn't say you have to pay me back this number of whatever, you just did it. And then the next time, they always gave you back something that was more valuable than what you had given them in the beginning, and that led to this relationship of IOUs where you're incentivized to keep exchanging with that person. I'm not saying that's the model, but I think that's one interesting model that we can go to. And then that kind of gets to the idea of we're using these contracts not because we're trying to create a technology to help us create a new type of money, but it's rather just to help us do the things that we want to do in a way that doesn't create these systems that are centralizing too much of the value and taking it for themselves. And then that question in terms of the volatility and the co-ops, I mean, as a co-op, I wouldn't say that you really need Bitcoin today. I would probably tell you to not use it today, or any of the other tokens that exist. I mean, I haven't looked at all of them, obviously, but I don't think that that's what your solution really is. I don't think we really have a platform that's super suitable yet. I mean, I haven't even explored Archain yet, but I'm excited to check it out. But I think that it's not just the financial piece that we're looking for in terms of a co-op. I think we're really thinking more about the governance.
Yeah. So any non-Jews in the audience?
I'm afraid I have two questions. The first was, I was interested to hear so much discussion about personal data, particularly in the context of AI. You talked about Google and Amazon and so on. Most of what they hold they will create value from is personal information. So I'd be interested to know why you think blockchains are an appropriate storage mechanism for personal data.
It's not.
It's not. Okay.
It should not current.
So in that case, but your proposition was that blockchains offer a different way of storing and managing personal information in some way. So I'd like to hear more about that. And secondly, cooperative principles include respect for the community, and I'd be interested to know whether any of these newer chains that I know less about, like our chain, solve the energy issue, so vast quantities of energy needed to do any of this stuff at all.
Let me take the first one, because I actually, I mean, I think when Jamie, right, says that that blockchains aren't an appropriate personal data store today, he's referring to the limitations of the existing blockchain architectures and their transaction volume and scalability. And so from those perspectives, he's absolutely right that they aren't. But there's another way.
Just throw one more thing in there, because it's also being able to triangulate. If you're doing something on a public ledger, you have to assume the state could go rogue, and you have a footprint of everything you've ever done that could be turned against you. And so that's my actual main concern with identity and personal data on a blockchain is that, yeah, that's pretty dangerous.
So I'm going to use I'm going to take the completely opposite perspective, and I think it's going to be very controversial. But I'll just point out that you know, I live in New York City. It's kind of an anonymous place, but I have a small cottage in a community that's tiny, 250 people in the wintertime, and I've been there all my life. My parents were there. And in that little community, there is very little anonymity, and the cost of that is, you know, you are who you are. You can't escape that. The value of that is that you can accomplish a lot because you've been there all your life, and essentially you've never screwed anybody, and everybody knows that. And so I think there's a possibility that we will come to understand that blockchains are open, public, immutable data stores, and that it may turn out that the best way for you to build reputation is for you to actually voluntarily build a reputation which is essentially accumulating all of your interactions, since, you know, with all of the, you know, social media networks, all of the services that you interact with on a blockchain. Because it's an immutable record, and because it's independently verifiable. You cannot change it after the fact. Now, the problem of it being a horrific, you know, weapon in the wrong hands is absolutely real. And the question is, how much do we trust the cryptography? And if we do trust the cryptography, which, frankly, if we don't trust cryptography, blockchains don't work, right? They immediately break down. So we're kind of assuming that we trust the cryptography. If we do trust the cryptography, and we believe that an individual should be in control of the keys of that immutable record of their entire interactions over time, and they can parcel out pieces of that interaction, you know, in ways that serve them and not serve a service provider in the sky, I think there's a really interesting possibility there. I realize how, as I say it, how scary it is, but I think it's something that we have to explore because of the potential of it.
I really, first I have to respond a little bit. I really enjoyed what you said, and it's very much in alignment with the kind of thinking that we do at our chain, in terms of the notion of there's a kind of recursive relationship between identity and reputation, and our notion of identity is qualitative, right? So you reveal as much about your personal information as is necessary to conduct the interaction. That's, you know, how much trust is necessary for that interaction. So that's a very, very natural way to do it. There are lots and lots of pitfalls. And it's not just about the cryptography. There's a lot more to it than that. But I really enjoy the subtlety of that thinking. That's spot on. With respect to the energy consumption that you were talking about. If you remember, I said there's a family of algorithms that are economically secured. So proof of work is one of them. And the way to think about this industry is a lot like the web from before. HTTP was a stupid protocol, really stupid. HTTP 1.0 was so stupid, no computer scientist in their right mind would design it. And because it was that stupid, then system administrators would look at the protocol and go, oh, that can't do anything. Yeah, I'll let it through the firewall. And because it was let through the firewall, there was this possibility that a network effect could happen. Proof of work is kind of like that. It's really stupid protocol, but it's so easy to explain and understand that it allows the network effect to happen. Okay? But there are lots of other economically secured distributed consensus algorithms. I work with Vitalik and Vlad on a variance of or a subfamily of that family called proof of stake, and in particular Casper, and that has a much lower energy consumption profile, and that fits into a larger solution that's really about chains of chains, and that's really what our chain is about: is networks of chains of chains that compose in a particular way. And if you look at nature, that's the only way to scale. It's got to be fractal, or it doesn't actually scale. So that helps with the energy problem. It also turns out, remember I said there's this recursive relationship between identity and reputation. It lines up with that as well.
I haven't thought so much about this, but in terms of that question about the energy, like, I mean, yeah, it's got to be, it can't be what it is. And while yes, there are tons of other protocols, I think it's important to look at like Bitcoin and Ethereum's carbon emissions as like, that's what's impactful though. So even though there's like the potential, like where the community is right now is like organized around those systems. So I think for me, I don't, like I was saying in the beginning, I don't really want to just focus on designing an algorithm for mining first, because I don't think that's the right way to do it for me. But I think there's something to do with reputation and mining. So rather than like just incentivizing people with tokens to prove that data is correct and hasn't been tampered with, other ways that you can do that are by, like, for example, kicking people off the network if they're submitting invalid information. And in order to do that, you have to have what Brad's saying in terms of a public identity and reputation about who you are. So there are different designs possible that could address that, but right now, I mean, it's not widely used.
Mm-hmm. So we are out of time, but we can maybe take one more question, yeah, if you're amenable. So one more, the lady.
I'm hesitating to ask this question. I struggle with immutability. The concept of immutability applied to reputation specifically, because of the social, organic nature of reputation. I too know about small communities, and one of the things, the downsides, of course, is that you accumulate this trail all over time that everybody knows, and you can't break out of that. You can't evolve out of that. And so I can't fit that notion of reputation into a paradigm that is about immutability.
I mean, it's a really complex topic, and I don't even necessarily know my opinion on it, to be honest with you. I think I don't know about in the States, but in Europe you have the right to be forgotten. And you know, they're going after Google and Facebook. Okay. So, you know, by law, they're ensuring that everyone has a right to be forgotten. Now, you could argue maybe some people shouldn't have the right to be forgotten. I don't know. It's kind of works.
Lovely question. Speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So,
you want to take this?
I'll project. Little background, I work on holochain, like our chain, it's kind of a different path into this stuff. We go pretty deeply into the right to be forgotten with immutable ledgers. And when you think about what the right to be forgotten is really about, it's not about you being able to step into somebody's mind and erase their memory. It's about whether or not that memory, whether it's recorded in a criminal record or somewhere else, whether it's an acceptable input into some new process, whether it's something that this new community or this other agency is going to be willing to take in or push out. Right? So right to be forgotten, these are all about social relationships at the end of the day. And what we're really doing here isn't just transactions, right? It's decisions about how we want to relate to one another. Yeah. And those are held as individuals and as individuals in relationship with others, deciding these are the rules of the game that we want to play by. And these kinds of things, if you're spreading information about what somebody did 30 years ago, that's not okay. That's not acceptable in our community. But these are not top-down things. These are decisions that we make as individuals and in relationship with others.
I just got to play with that for just a minute. You know, it's one thing for a judge to say, okay, that line of questioning or that evidence is now inadmissible because we're following this particular protocol. But when we're talking about a community, it's a different thing entirely, right? I was just thinking about, as you were talking, I was just thinking about the scene in the new Thor Ragnarok movie where the Hulk gets out of the hot tub and Thor says, "I can't unsee that." Right. You know, so it's the same thing here. There's certain acts that a community just can't unsee. So, I mean, how does that work then?
And there's a trade-off, and I think one of the key elements is devolving control over identity to give individuals the choice, the ability to make those trades. If I want to use my reputation to achieve something within a community, I probably have to reveal myself in some way, and I may have to reveal myself historically. But if I choose, to go to the big city and to become anonymous, I ought to be able to choose that, but I don't have the same leverage that I had in the smaller community where my reputation was who I was. And so, each of these is going to be a choice. And to get back to the observation that what we're really talking about is the metagame, who gets to make that choice is really what matters.
So I really enjoyed this, so thank you so much. It was a fantastic discussion, fantastic questions. And if the rules of the game work perfectly well, there should theoretically be some coffee out there waiting for you. So continue the discussion, and thank you very much to this. Maybe a round of applause. Fantastic.